While the 2600 successor was still in the works, they released a brand new version of it that also had two of its own unique models. One being the most common variant of 2600 as it was released in the peak of Atari sales, and the other just being fully black. These were dubbed 4 switchers, as the biggest difference is the removal of the difficulty switches. The black one is when the VCS was officially called the 2600. It was also referred to as the Vader model since it was so dark and brooding, and also because Star Wars was really popular at the time. If I could choose any to have, this is the one I'd want.
Bet. Greetings from the Tech Cave, Fenris here, and today we are taking a look at the Atari 2600. More specifically, this is a 4-switch, all-black Atari 2600, or as it's more commonly known as, the Vader model. Now, this was a recent eBay purchase, and according to the listing, it was marked as untested. So when I got the unit in, I plugged it up, cycled a cartridge in and out a few times just to make sure to loosen up any dirt and stuff, flicked on the power, and it turned out this unit worked just fine. Now, the reason why I decided to purchase the Atari 2600 is because this is going to be sent off to another YouTuber who goes by the name Melody Nosurname. Now, they had posted a all-encompassing Atari documentary that mainly focused on all the hardware that they produced, and in that video they had stated that if they were to ever own an Atari 2600, they would prefer to have the Vader model. So seeing an opportunity to just, well, do something nice for another creator, but also to make some content, I figured why not? Let's work on an Atari for this episode. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be both refurbishing it and modding it. So, without further delay, let's get started. So now that we got the Atari 2600 taken apart, what we need to do is remove the shielding that guards the internals of the 2600. And luckily, it's actually pretty simple. We have 4 tabs that lock this top and bottom shielding into place. And all we need to do to remove it is to twist them off with some pliers. So without further delay, let's get to it. Okay, so now that I got the system taken apart, we can now install what is known as the Atari 2600 Refresh Kit. Now, this is a little kit that you can purchase from Console 5 that contains all the parts that are known to go bad on 2600 systems. And even though this unit does work, I feel that it's necessary to change some components out just to give it a nice refresh, if you will. So without further delay, let's get to it. Starting things off, we have 2 electrolyte capacitors that we need to replace. One is a standard radial capacitor, while the other is an axial capacitor. So the difference between them is a radial capacitor has one side where both legs protrude out, while the axial capacitor have one leg for each side of the capacitor. And as you can see, the axial capacitor is still polarized and indicates the right pad here is ground. So we are just going to get these 2 desoldered and install the new ones. So now that we have the electrolytics installed, we can now move our attention to these two shiny boys right here. These are polystyrene capacitors and are often the culprit for missing audio on these systems. Now, unlike the electrolytics we just worked with, these capacitors are non-polarized, so we can insert them in any direction that we want. However, these capacitors are heat sensitive, so when installing these new ones, you want to work with as low of a temp as possible and to not leave your iron on them for too long. I am going to solder these new ones in using a temperature of 250 degrees Celsius just to play it safe. Okay, struggled a little bit to get the leftmost pad of this capacitor cleared out, but we were able to do that, and as well, we were able to install these capacitors without damaging them, so all good. Now to move on to the last bit of the refresh kit, and it starts with this little guy right here. This is a polyester film capacitor, and for some ungodly reason, Atari did not install the correct value capacitor for this system. This capacitor, according to their own service manual, is supposed to be a 0.22 microfarad capacitor, but this is a 0.1 microfarad capacitor. Now, this results in video quality issues just due to the fact that this capacitor does not have the juice for keeping power stable. So, we are going to be popping this out and replacing it with one of the correct value. And as well, we are going to be removing the 7805 and DC jack and replacing them with fresh ones. So, let's get to it. Alright, and with that, the refresh kit is fully installed. Now you may have noticed that I did not put the screw and the thermal paste onto the 7805, and that is because there is a lot of exposed ground plane here, and I figured it would just be better to direct solder it to this ground plane, so that way we have the best heat dissipation as possible from the 7805 to the grounding of the Atari 2600 here. So with that out of the way, we can now move forward with the video mod. So what I have here is the Ultimate Atari Video Mod. This is a universal mod board for the Atari line of home computer systems, which includes the 800, 800XL, 800XE, 2600, 5200, and 7800. With this mod, we can take the native Luma and Chroma signals that are present in the hardware and create our own clean composite NS video signals straight from the source. And fortunately, they were gracious enough to include an instruction manual for this mod, but unfortunately, this doesn't contain any specific instructions for installing it into a 4-switch model. All it really contains is some text about the saturation boost circuit and 2 pictures of the wire install. So for our purposes, this manual is useless. So instead, I had to look up a forum post on how to install this into our 4-switcher, which I will also leave in the description below. So with that post pulled up in my monitor, let's get this installed. So the first order of business is we need to remove this RF module here, just so that way there's no potential interference being added to our video output. So let's not waste any time and get this removed. So with the RF module removed, we can now move forward with installing the UAV mod. So in order to install this into our 2600, we are going to be running some wires from these marked points on the mod board to the main board. Now, if we were to take a closer look, as you can see, we have through holes that are marked as 1, S, 2, 3, and 0. So 0 to 3 are Luma inputs, while the S pad is our sync signal. 0 is marked as not connected for the 2600, so we will only be worrying about Lumas 1, 2, and 3. And right along the output side, we have a color input pin that will also be attached to the board. Now, on screen is an image where we are going to be attaching each of these signals onto the main board. The sync and 3 Luma pins are going to be attached to the topmost pins of these specific resistors shown here, while color input is wired to the bottommost pin of the resistors next to Luma 1. As well, we need to lift a 820 ohm resistor that is directly next to the TIA chip. This is because this model of 2600 has a saturation boost circuit, which will absolutely mess up your colors if not disconnected. Alternatively, you can lift pin 6 of the TIA chip to achieve the same results as lifting the resistor, but I feel that lifting the resistor is much easier to do. So with all that out of the way, let's get to installing this. So with the mod board installed, all we need to do now is to attach a wire for audio, which we'll be pulling from this right pin of the lower resistor here. And as well, we need to mount our jacks to the bottom shell. And luckily, there is a perfect space to mount said jacks. So in order to do this, we need to first get some masking tape and measure out an adequate amount of space between each jack. From there, we can mark it on our mask tape and start punching in holes. So let's not waste any time and get straight to it. Okay, so we have it all taped and marked up to where each of the jacks are going to be mounted an equal distance away from each other. So with that out of the way, we now need to take some notes as to how big of holes we're going to need. So I have my sticky notes here, and I have an RCA jack and our S-Video jack. Now the S-Video jack that we're going to be using is a panel mount one that I kept from an NES RGB kit because they typically ship with an 8-pin mini DIN and an S-Video jack. I like to keep those around in case of situations like this. So the first thing we need to do is take our calipers And we're going to be starting with the RCA jack. So we want to get one of the threads. And as we could see, we're getting a read of 0.244 inches. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this little tree bit here that I use for drilling out holes, and we're going to be figuring out which one is going to be perfect. And according to this, setting 6 is going to be the perfect diameter for our RCA holes. So we're just going to mark 6, reset, 0 out, and we're just going to do the same thing for our S video jack. We got a read of 4.38 or 4.39. Maybe let's try. Okay, 4.47. So we got it like right at the edge. So now we just take our tree bit again, go down until it stops, and it stops at 11. So we're going to mark in our notes 11. So now that we have the measurements for our tree bit for our jacks, we can now begin to drill in our holes. So the first order of business is we need to drill some pilot holes, so that way when we come in with our step bit later, it doesn't cause the plastic to crack or warp. So I have my 5/64 bit attached to my drill, and we're just going to come into one of the spots that we marked and drill. So with our pilot holes all drilled in, we are now going to drill out the rest of the hole with our step bit. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to do S video, then I'm going to do yellow, white, and red RCA. So let's get to it. Okay, so unfortunately I wasn't paying attention and my camera battery died in the middle of filming me installing these jacks. But as you most likely saw, I had to actually widen each of these holes by one extra step in order to be able to fit all the jacks into place. And as well, I installed all the wires and even hot glued the panel mount S-Video jack into place. So sorry I couldn't catch all that on film, but at least you can see the final result. Now you may also notice for the audio side, I have a couple of capacitors and a couple of resistors in line. So this isn't really necessary, it's more optional if anything, but my friend Ace taught me that when splitting a mono signal between two channels, it's better to just have a couple of resistors and a couple of capacitors in place just to make sure that everything is stable, if you will. Now, again, it's not totally necessary. You can still get away with just splitting the audio raw, but I like to just add this in place just in case. And as well, you may notice that I have separate cabling for each of the signals. And that's because generally speaking, it's best to run your own signal and ground for each individual signal. So that way there's no potential for crosstalking. So as you can see, I have a 3-wire ribbon for S-Video, a single coaxial cable that runs between the signal and ground for composite, and audio shares its own signal and ground coaxial cable. So now all we need to do is install it onto the main board. Alright, so as you can see, we got everything all hooked up to the retro tank. I got my test cartridge in place, the power cable plugged in, and a controller plugged in. So what we're going to do is hit the power and see if it works. And look at that. We got composite video. And let's switch over to S video, and we got S video. So it looks like the mod's working just fine. So let's hit our button. And we got gameplay too, so everything seems to be working just fine. Although it's a little difficult to play one-handed. Alright, enough of that. So, now that we've confirmed that the Atari works, all we need to do now is button it up. Actually, a couple more things before we move on to reassembly. You may notice that we're not putting the shielding back on that we removed earlier. And the reason why is the shielding isn't really necessary. It was only there for FCC regulation purposes, but since we're not using RF, we don't really need to have that on anymore. And as well, I'm going to be replacing the little foam gaskets that I removed from the switches earlier with a fresh set. So let's just go ahead, take these off, and slide these on. These aren't necessary for the functionality of the Atari. It's just there for completion's sake. I mean, after all, we went through the trouble of refreshing it, so why not refresh the gaskets? So now, let's get on with final reassembly. Okay, one more detail and I swear we're done. So when inserting the two back screws that go into these channels here, you don't screw them down straight. You actually have to go in at an angle, and that's mainly because the screw posts are actually angled upward just to make sure that it locks both the board and the shell in place. So just something to keep in mind. Alright, and with that, the Atari 2600 is finished. We got a refresh kit installed, we got the system cleaned up, and we got a nice composite and S-Video mod installed in the system. So yeah, this unit is ready to go. So, I have to admit, even though the Atari 2600 is not my favorite system from this generation, this was a lot of fun to work on, and you know, thinking about it, maybe I might end up revisiting this topic in the future with a different Atari 2600 system. But you know what, that's further down the line. For now, I'd just like to thank you all so much for watching, and I have to thank Melody Nosurname for the idea behind this video as well. I hope when she gets it in that she enjoys it just as much as I enjoyed putting it together. So yeah, with that being said, if you liked what you saw, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, until the blue moon rises, I'll see you next time.